Welcome. Glad you could join us for today's conversation. I'm Felicity Eziwike. Since the end of World War II, Germany has paid over $90 billion to Holocaust survivors and their families and continues to do so today. But on the matter of slavery and colonialism in Africa, it is a different matter. The calls for reparations has been on for a long time. Sadly, it was just in 2013 there was a sort of optic, an out-of-court settlement by the UK government to pay $30 million to people tortured during the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s in Kenya. In 2021, Germany agreed to pay $1.3 billion after officially recognizing its soldiers had committed genocide in Namibia in the 1904s. But they fell short of calling this reparation, saying it was grants made out of moral obligations and not legal ones. These actions, however, only cover specific instances, but not the more general question on slavery and colonial rule. Reparatory justice for Africans and people of African descent remains central to African Union AU agenda today, as when it was initiated in 1963. In 2023, the AU declared 2025 as the year of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, underscoring the need to address the lasting effects of colonialization, slavery, and systemic discrimination while tackling contemporary challenges. Now, the relevance of this theme came up again during a meeting of African legislators held in South Africa only in July 23 here, where legislators made a unified call for reparations from former colonial powers. According to them, the demand is not just about financial compensations, it's about acknowledging the historical injustices that have shaped our societies and our economies. So in today's conversation, we will be exploring the complexities around the conversations about reparations, the moral and legal arguments, and the potential forms that it could take. We'll also discuss the challenges and opportunities that come with pursuing reparations. I hope we have time to do all of that, but I do have capable guests. I have joining us Managing Partner Matsiko, Wanda and Arinda Advocates, Sam Wanda. He joins us from Kampala. We also have Project Lead, Reparative Justice, Pan-African Lawyers Union, Root Ogberwokon, joining us from Nairobi. Also in this conversation, we have lecturer, Wits University, Patrick Kadima. He joins us from Johannesburg. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for giving us your time. Now, let's do with ladies first. One would think, after this much time has passed, perhaps Africa should focus on self-growth rather than seeking reparations for crimes of the past. Why do you think we continue to pursue this matter?
Thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me very clearly. I think without taking too much time, we have a culture of impunity on this continent when we talk about our leaders and, with corruption and with the atrocities that are currently happening. And I know that many people will say, oh, well, if we're talking about reparations, why don't we focus on what is currently happening and how do we, mobilize ourselves for our future? And I think that when we talk about reparations and when we talk about the right to repair, we're really building from the bottom up. And I'm not talking about building from the bottom up in terms of grassroots movement, even if that's a big part of it. When I say bottom up, I mean that we have to retrace our steps to the past and really understand the integration and the foundational considerations that went into building some of our countries and our continent. I think that we did, and for many instances on this continent, when colonialism ended or when oppressive governments, from the past left office, it really was a please and thank you situation. There was no sort of redress. There was no sort of, accountability, not in the robust way that we've seen happen in several other instances. I think you mentioned your introduction, the German government paying reparations to victims of the Holocaust. So what then needs to happen is we need to recognize that for us to really and truly progress on this continent, we need to address that culture of impunity. The leaders that we have today, in many instances, think that they can pillage, they can steal, they can loot, and they can murder and kill. And where did that start from? It started from the very foundations of African nation building. This is our history that we must reckon with. And in order to truly move forward, we need to retrace our steps back to the past, and we need to really assess and really unpack some of the things that happened on this continent, the harms and the traumas and the destruction of our systems, and really re-articulate and seek for repair. Now, the seeking for repair is not something that is moral or that's something we should debate about. It is a right that has been recognized again in many instances in the international community, in the African Union, and even in some of our domestic legal systems. And so we must leave no stone unturned, really and truly. And I believe the African Union in Agenda 2063, and even in articulating the theme of the year being reparation, this is an essential part of Africa's development agenda. And until we really reconcile and until we really repair what was done in the past and we hold people accountable for what happened in the past, only then can we set up the systems in place for assessing and for moving forward and holding the current leadership of the continent to account.
Thank you very much. Sam, we're waiting for these actions. First off, do you agree that we're waiting for these actions in order for us to move forward? That is on the one hand. On the other hand, I intentionally brought up the reparation, allegedly, from Germany and the attempts by the UK, even though they don't want to mention that is the case. But we're looking at an Africa-wide scale of reparation. How are we going to do that? What will be the yardstick? We've been going on about reparation for quite a bit, but we still don't seem coordinated enough. Will we find an end to this journey that we're on? Sam? Sam, can you hear us?
To me, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yes. To me, it's a very good gesture. It's very insightful that our leaders are now sitting down and determining what we really need to fight for, in terms of our rights. And to me, I think it's a good path that we are taking, but also we need to first recollect from within ourselves and see how best do we move with this forward. We are in situations where, as we are claiming for reparations for slavery, for our stolen resources, we are still treating our fellow Africans, fellow citizens within our countries as slaves. We are encroaching onto our neighbors for their resources. So it becomes really complicated for us to demand and assert a.
Okay, I think the network has taken off Sam for a bit. I'll just go to you, Patrick, and ask in another way, slightly the same question. So far, all we've had is perfunctory, that's been described as perfunctory efforts at acknowledging some of the atrocities that went down in our history. Are we to wait indefinitely, or are there steps that can be taken to compel some sort of action that is real? Patrick, please.
Thank you, and good evening to your. Thank you, and good evening to your viewers. I think currently there needs to be political will from the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament to push this discussion, this debate on the issue of reparation. It's one thing discussing it because it's the theme of the year at your Pan-African Parliament in Midrand and in Addis Ababa at the African Union. And it's another thing taking it elsewhere to multilateral forums where you can discuss these issues and bring it up in the United Nations General Assembly and so on and so forth. These are the debates that need to be put up in the public. But knowing what how the institutions of the African Union work, I do not think that anytime soon, and this is my honest criticism, I do not think anytime soon that there will be any tangible actions taken by the African countries in terms of this issue of reparations. But definitely, as Ruth has stated, and she has correctly stated, that there is a need for reparations to happen. We cannot neglect the issue of reparations, right? It's one thing to accept that reparations need to happen. It's another to see this, issue of reparations taking formidable steps, or formidable steps being taken in order to get the issue on the global stage. For example, look, here in South Africa, we have the issue of apartheid that happened and so on and so forth. And, we have several civil society organizations that have decided to represent victims of apartheid, that suffered and are demanding reparations. And they took it to the Constitutional Court, which is the apex court of the country. And the president had sought to oppose the matter, but he decided after a few days that he will not oppose the matter. I think with certain ministers that are involved, he will not oppose the matter of reparations, and rather he will look into establishing I think a commission of inquiry into the matter, and so on and so forth.
Ruth, let me come back to you and take on another aspect. From the lawmakers, they said call for reparation. You actually highlighted it in your comment. It's not just about financial compensation. It's also about acknowledging historical injustices that have shaped what we have today as a society and our economies. What forms could reparations take? I know there are a couple of forms thrown around. If you just speak to us on that.
Yes, of course. I think for many of the things that happened on the continent and even in the African diaspora, many of these things were codified in law. In South Africa, for instance, apartheid was, something that was codified in law. Discrimination and segregation was something that was codified in law. Dispossession of people from the ancestral land was something that was codified in law. And the legacy of that is still being felt on the continent today. We have indigenous people who have lost access to land, they've lost access to their cultural heritage, etc. and etc. And I guess the best way to perhaps address this would be to cite some of the examples of robust and efficient, reparative justice programs that we've seen in other parts of the world. Now, I would like to highlight, for instance, the Canadian Reparations Agreement, particularly in relation to the First Nations and the Indigenous residential schools, where, discrimination and an entire campaign targeting the First Nations of Canada was implemented for many years, for decades, in the country. And in fact, when they did get, a reparations agreement, there was financial compensation, of course, but there was law reform. Right. Yes, we acknowledge and we say, yes, this law was wrong, and the campaign and the effectiveness and the enforcement of this law was wrong. But then in addition to that apology, we actually changed the law. We actually now begin to write certain things like affirmative action to be sure that the people that were for so long disadvantaged are now able to come to a position within society where they can compete and function in the same way that they would have functioned if we never did them harm in the first place. We have truth and reconciliations, we have community investment, we have the global, for instance, the African Union is trying to set up the Global Reparations Fund. So yeah, it's really not just about finances, even if finances is a big part of it, especially when we talk about resources. But there's a whole lot of other means to reparations, to achieving true and robust reparations.
Yeah, but before you jump off that part, Ruth, sorry to interject, but I needed you to take that on because it's part of the question I was going to ask as we go. But since you mentioned it, the quest to create a global reparation fund. We know some of the challenges that was mentioned was a lack of coherence. Who would manage these funds? Who will pay into it? How much will be satisfactory? These were questions that were put up. Again, it comes back to the conversation around, will there be any amount that will be sufficient reparation? I know there are others who will come to that. That will be enough compensation for what we're talking about.
Honestly, if you ask me, the answer is no. Because you can't put a price on human life. You can't put a price on human suffering or on human dignity, right? And I think that to truly and properly articulate the extent of the damage that has been done, and this is something that, in CSO spaces we're still talking about. And to some extent, our siblings in, the diaspora have done some of the studies where they've properly articulated that X amount of slaves, X millions of slaves came into this continent, and economically they were able to contribute this amount of money to the system in building some of these nations in North America. And with that kind of articulation, that kind of financial articulation, you are now able to kind of assess the contributions made, or I wouldn't even call it contributions, the extortion from people's bodies that were made, and try and come up with a kind of formula to then appropriate, a figure to it. But truly, if we're being honest, it's not enough. Okay. It's just something. It's better than nothing. Yeah.
All right. And, I'll come back
just to wrap up real quick. Okay. No worries.
Sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I was just going to say that kind of study is what we're missing on the continent. And so we're a bit far back in our journey for reparative justice. But that kind of study, that kind of financial and economic articulation is something that needs to happen.
All right, let me come back to Sam. The network cut him off earlier. Sam, if you can hear me, can you hear me, please? Let's confirm that.
I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. One of the forms of reparations that has come up is the guarantees of non-repetition, and that kind of throws me off. I'm like, are there guarantees? Earlier, when Patrick was talking, he talked about the fact that our own leaders are dropping the ball at a stupendous scale. So what are we looking for when we talk about that form of reparation? Is it just being idealistic?
Until we see our leaders moving forward with the necessary force and legal action available, to me it's idealistic. I do not see their intent. This discussion has been there for a while. They have brushed it over. We are hoping that this time around, when they make this statement, they are ready and with the full strength to demand for reparation. As Ruth said, I mean, it's not enough. Nothing is enough. You cannot adequately compensate for human dignity, for human life that was lost during the time. But compensation is ideally meant to atone damages for something and bring someone to almost a similar state that they should have been in at that time. So I do not think mostly our leaders are ready to push it forward. As I was explaining earlier, our same leaders are abusing other rights, other people's rights. So we do not see, they have no respect, one, for rights of others. And therefore, if you have no respect for rights of others, then it becomes complicated for you to convince me that you're going to stand and push for the rights of those that were abused long ago.
All right,
Thank
Patrick,
you.
I mean, the level of self-accusations of mistrust and self-serving leveled against our leaders, yet, if we want to have this conversation and make real headway, they have to be in the middle of it. Is it possible for civil society organizations to help put our government in check in the pursuit of reparations if we are to really make something of it? Patrick, please.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you a bit there.
You didn't get my question?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, Sam just talked about the distrust for government, but then, however you look at it, they have to be in the conversation somehow. If we are to make, they are the leaders, whether we like them or not. So I was thinking, is it possible for civil society organizations to serve as checks in this quest for reparation?
Yes, of course. There is plenty room for civil society to play play a role in this quest. We have seen, for example, in South Africa. In fact, in South Africa, civil society has been the one that has pushed a lot in terms of this issue of reparations for victims of apartheid. Right? It was not the state, it was not the government, it was not any politician. It was civil society organizations that pulled up resources. That despite lack of funding, I can tell you now that there is about one or two main donors that I know, external donors that have funded this issue of transitional justice and so on and so forth to civil societies in South Africa, right? So and also there is a study done, I know, of a colleague abroad who has assessed the role of civil society in reparations and in transitional justice, and they have played a positive impact. They continue to play a positive impact, but also we need to note the limits of civil society's involvement in these issues. Is that there is lack of capacity due to funding, and that is a main issue for them. But all in all, civil society have an important role to play in this issue, and they can push the African Union, they can push the Pan-African Parliament into pursuing this issue, because as it is currently, I can tell you now, in the next 10 years, 15 years, we will be back again talking about these reparations issues, because nothing has been done but just a talk shop.
All right, I looked at the time. I mean, talk shop or no talk shop, when we say that, I tend to pause, because at the end of the day, it's still dialogue. We're all going to go around a table, and that's why we don't give up in conversations like this. Time is not our friend, so this question, I want all three of you to speak on it. What should be the next steps in the reparation movement, and how can we better build momentum? I'll start with you, Ruth.
Yes, of course. I think I might maybe be the only optimist between my fellow panelists. I do think that there is a lot already going on. This year in particular, we've really seen a drive within the AU spaces, within CSO spaces. And there is a lot of things. I think very recently, the African Union confirmed the president of Ghana, John Mahama, as the focal point within the AU system for reparations. And we expect and we hope that some of the mechanisms that they already identified would be properly institutionalized, and then we'd be able to begin work in earnest. Already they extended the year of, the theme of the year of reparations, so the decade of reparations. This is something that came, I think, last month. And so what next? What can be done? I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of sensitizing our people, sensitizing Africans about the right to reparations and, what is owed to them, and really unpacking that. So there's a whole re-education campaign that needs to happen. Some of the myths around reparations of, it's just going to cause division, and, truly, we don't really need it, let's just move on, and et cetera, et cetera. Some of these things need to be unpacked. We need to speak to our grandparents and really make sure that our grandparents and our elders in our community, and really make sure that we are documenting properly and we're doing the right studies, the financial and economic studies. I talked about the anthropological studies, the sociology studies, to be sure that we're really and truly articulating our need and our right to reparation, and really articulating the harm in the way that is best suited for our needs as a continent. I think I'll leave it there.
All right. Sam, let me come to you. I know you don't hold a whole lot of optimism with this movement, but if you were perhaps to create an agenda to get us some movement in efforts to get reparation, what would be the next steps you would suggest?
Thank you so much. One, I believe one of the biggest steps we need to take as a continent, and that's if we are to achieve what we want, is unity amongst our leaders, to push for one agenda, but also push it with reason. But in the process of pushing it, our leaders should not have selfish interests in the same. That is one of the things that has costed the voices of African leaders. We've seen them come together just for a particular issue. We saw how they came together trying to stop the ICC from prosecuting African leaders, but they did not come up with solutions on how to bring to account leaders who are committing crimes against humanity. So the interests here should be for the general population of Africa and not their selfish interests. And if we are pushing for reparation, it should be for the interest of their citizens, of their countries, and not the individual interests of the leaders who are pushing it. Thank you.
Patrick, same question.
Yeah. So, in essence, I'm not sorry. I'm not optimistic, but I have reasons why.
And that's why I phrased it differently for Sam and you.
Yeah. So, in essence, you have this, European Union, this EU Parliament and Pan-African Parliament meetings. Let them discuss those things there. And another issue is, why not, if you are really serious about this issue, why does the African Union or African member states not go to the United Nations General Assembly and ask that the United Nations General Assembly request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the question of reparations? Yes, although the advisory opinion from the court might not be binding, but it will put pressure on these European countries to start engaging in reparative justice talks. Because as it stands now, I'm telling you right now, those European countries will not be interested in whether your moral arguments and so on and so forth of reparations. But take it to the ICJ, request an advisory opinion, and let the ICJ decide whether there is a case for reparations, and let the pressure mount on these European countries to start these discussions of how they can pay for these reparations. It's simple as that. But as long as these steps are not taken, we must forget. We will be back here in 15 years' time with Ruth. And I doubt she'll be optimistic this time. I mean, in the next 15 years.
I'm going to stick with Ruth on this one and be optimistic. It was my job to ask the question, but I want to hold hope that we can get some sort of, reparation after a long haul. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.